As a relatively closed political system, for thousands of years, the division of labor between central and local governments in terms of financial power and administrative authority can be regarded as one of the most distinctive aspects of China's economic and social structure. Under the feudal dynasty, a strong center and a weak periphery led to social stability, but the economy was rigid. Conversely, a weak center and a strong periphery could lead to regional warlordism. The seesaw struggle between imperial power and the power of the chancellors ended after the Ming Dynasty. But the overt and covert struggles between the central and local governments have continued to this day. In contemporary China, the prosperity of the coastal developed regions and the depression of the inland underdeveloped areas are gradually creating an increasingly clear economic divide. Under such circumstances, the central-local conflict over financial power and administrative authority is igniting an invisible fiscal civil war. This war is not a smoky-armed conflict, but a long-term game about resource allocation, power division, and policy execution. Today's video will explain the historical evolution of the relationship between the central and local governments, the scale and causes of local financial black holes, and most importantly, how the fiscal civil war between the central and local governments will evolve in the future. It is important to clarify that a term that will appear frequently in today's video is financial authority. Core authority refers to the tasks and responsibilities that a certain level of government should undertake to use financial funds to provide basic public services. In simple terms, spending money to get things done is called authority, which is essentially closer to obligations and responsibilities rather than the conventionally understood rights. Since the establishment of New China, the relationship between the central and local governments can be basically divided into four main historical stages, which are the period of large regional decentralization from 1949 to 1952, the period of centralization from 1953 to 1957, and the period of unified release from 1958 to 1978. It can be seen that the relationship between the central and local governments fluctuated with the times. This situation did not end until the reform and opening up. After the implementation of reform and opening up, the central government delegated many financial management powers to local government. Compared with the past, local governments have independent budget formulation rights and a certain degree of financial autonomy. Since local governments only need to pay a fixed amount of financial taxes to the central government each year, many local governments adopt the method of reducing or exempting corporate taxes to retain financial revenues and develop together with local enterprises. This also led to inflation at the end of the 1980s in China and put the central government in a serious crisis, even occurring twice where the central government had to borrow money from local governments, forming a weak central state that had never appeared since the founding of the People's Republic of China. On the eve of the 1993 tax-sharing reform, the central government's revenue accounted for 22% of the total, while local governments enjoyed as high as 78% of the revenue. Therefore, the period from 1978 to 1993 can be called the era of strong local powers in China. In 1993, a book titled China's National Capability Report Area has published, pointing out that the financial absorption capacity of the Chinese central government was declining sharply. If this trend is not reversed, it may follow the disintegration of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. This book, co-authored by economists He Gang and Wang Shaguang, has attracted high-level attention after its publication and played an important role in promoting the rapid implementation of the tax-sharing system. The tax-sharing reform, which was designed in 1992, promulgated in 1993, and implemented in 1994, marked the third stage of the relationship between the central and local governments in China. In this stage, the revenue between the central and local governments gradually entered a state of being split in half, but the local authority further expanded. 80% of fiscal expenditures fell on localities. In this process, the central government used finance as a lever to adjust policies in various places, and through transfer payments, generally speaking, the tax-sharing era did promote China's economic development. This relationship between central and local financial authority and administrative authority generated a core driving force for the rapid development of China's economy at that time, which is the local competition model. Local governments, in order to promote local economic development, conducted investment, attraction, and industrial development promotion in a manner similar to a company and achieved competition among various local governments. It should be noted that at that time, the overall background of China's economic and social development was a relatively scarce supply side, so this model had its place. While the central government became wealthy, the tax-sharing reform also left a huge hidden danger, including the increased financial burden on local governments, which has continued to this day. The fourth stage has been from after 2008 until now, as China enters the era of large-scale infrastructure construction. In this stage, the division of authority between the central and local governments has further polarized, with local authority and fiscal expenditure scale growing larger and larger. However, the tax-sharing model has not changed significantly on the surface. Local fiscal expenditures have exceeded 85%, and if various local debts are included, local expenditure scale may have exceeded 90% or more. Local governments, in order to meet their financial needs, especially in the later period of this stage, and particularly after 2018, as China's infrastructure and production capacity have entered a state of dual surplus. The local competition model, which originally promoted the economy, has become an obstacle to economic development. In the past, the financial distribution and circulation between the central and local governments, from a large logical perspective centered on one word, Ting's transfer payment. Based on the tax-sharing system, about half of the local finance needs to be handed over to the central government, with the main contributors actually being developed regions, especially the provinces in the southeast. In an ideal state, the central government, according to the financial surplus or deficit of each province, subsidizes various regions, especially underdeveloped areas. Through this method, achieving mutual support and assistance between developed and backward areas and forming an ideal development of China's economic chessboard. However, reality is very bony. As local authority becomes heavier and heavier, relying solely on official fiscal revenue can no longer support the excessive real rights demands of local government. Whether actively or passively, the central government has long tolerated local governments obtaining revenue through two other channels, which are land transfer fees and local debts. At its peak, the national land transfer fee reached 8.7 trillion, only slightly less than the peak transfer payment. At the same time, local governments have accumulated a huge amount of local debt through explicit and implicit ways, especially after 2008. It is estimated that the total scale of this debt has reached more than 100 trillion. These 10 trillion transfer payments, 8.7 trillion land transfer fees, and more than 100 trillion accumulated local debts over the past decade have basically formed the financial foundation for local governments to bear more than 90% of the real rights in past years. For China's backward provinces, which is actually the vast majority of provinces, the three sources of funds for local government finance transfer payments, land transfer fees, and local debts are the lifeline. In 2021, in China's transfer payment system, it is basically supported by 8 net tax contribution provinces to support the financial sources of all other provinces. The problem of local debt has been fully exposed. Among these three financial sources, land transfer fees and local debts, most of the collateral also comes from the land resources of urban investment companies. With the end of the real estate era in China, the Central Local Financial Authority and Administrative Authority Division that has lasted for 16 years, since 2008, has also come to an end. Today, the consumption tax reform has been on the agenda. In fact, in the current central-local relationship, the financial authority and administrative authority division system has ended. After going through 4 stages, China's central-local reform is about to enter the 5th stage. The asset liability sheet recession is usually caused by a large-scale decline in real estate and stock market asset prices. Due to enterprises and the financial industry, the residential sector carried out a large-scale asset investment or speculation during the asset bubble period. When asset prices decline rapidly and on a large scale, it will seriously impact the balance sheets of all social departments. After the impact, all departments prioritize debt repayment, leading to irrational economic behavior by the group, which in turn leads to a spiraling deflationary decline in the entire society's investment and consumption. The current economy is undoubtedly heading towards this stage. However, after careful study, it will be found that the asset liability sheet recession faced by China at present is different from the usual global recession. China's typical characteristic is the rapid decline in current real estate prices, resulting in structural asset liability sheet recession. Among them, local governments are the most severely affected because local governments bear more than 90% of fiscal expenditure responsibilities and the main sources of funds transfer payments. Local debts and land transfer fees are directly related to land prices. This has led to the paralysis of local governments in the decline of real estate prices, leading to a decline in local government expenditure. In order to solve the fiscal deficit, many local governments, in addition to selling state-owned assets, also distort public service prices and expand logging income. We have witnessed many similar examples in the past few years, such as the adjustment of natural gas meters in Chongqing and the tragedy of truck drivers in Habibie being fined and detained for offline positioning systems, leading to suicide. Such incidents will continue to emerge in the future, especially in county areas with high dependence on transfer payments. Under the normal system, the government should expand expenditure and reduce the burden on enterprises and residents. However, due to the different finances of China's central and local governments can only further reduce their expenditure, and the burden on enterprises and residents continues to increase. The local government expenditure and system industry chain, which was originally the economic support of society, has evolved into a nested black hole that absorbs the economic vitality of local governments and the central government under the current situation. Thanks to the accumulation of China's economy over the past 20 years and the absolute leadership over local governments, the central government's financial situation can still be maintained. Therefore, we should mainly focus on how big the scale of the local financial black hole is. The land transfer fee has dropped from 8.7 trillion in 2021 to below 4.7 trillion this year, and it may further decline in the future. Under the strong control of the central government, the actual new debt of local debts is also very small. The accumulated huge local debts are mainly maintained by borrowing new and old. Rough estimates show that debt is equivalent to 4.6% of China's GDP in 2023. And this is a relatively conservative estimate. If the normalization of special national bonds and local debt replacement is started in time, it will be a long period of time in the future. In 2023, China's overall fiscal expenditure is about 50 trillion, of which half of the public budget expenditure accounts for 55.6%. And this part is mainly rigid expenditure with very little room for operation. The government fund budget expenditure accounts for 13.8%, more than 10 trillion, which is mainly spent by local governments to support industrial infrastructure and economic development. This expenditure has continued to decline in the past few years, with a decline of 17.6% in the first half of 2023, which is also the direct reason for the current deflation and poor liquidity in China's economy. Therefore, the financial authority and administrative authority relationship between China's central and local governments has reached a point where reform is necessary. It can also be seen from many high-level meetings this year that the central government is promoting this reform. However, it is a pity that so far the central and local governments have not truly relieved the authority. However, just like the long-awaited stimulus plan, the adjustment of the central-local relationship has become a foregone conclusion. The division of financial authority and administrative authority will be the tug-of-war between China's central and local governments in the next few years. Based on the above historical review and current situation analysis, the next step will be to analyze and deduce the future central-local pattern, especially in the fiscal and economic fields for everyone's thinking. The future policy outlook is basically divided into three major categories. Ting's profile first, the basic framework of the tax sharing system will not undergo significant qualitative changes. Second, the central government will introduce a series of means to help local governments restore fiscal balance. These means are now beginning to emerge. Third, continue to strengthen centralization of power and weaken local competition. Let's talk about the basic framework of the tax sharing system. First, it is necessary to understand what the essence of the tax sharing system is. In fact, the core purpose of the tax sharing system is to balance local power and strengthen the central government. From the income and expenditure situation of the central government's general public budget in 2023, this core logic can be understood. In 2023, the total income of the central government's general public budget is 10.7 trillion. And the total expenditure of the general public budget is 14.9 trillion, with a deficit of more than 4 trillion between income and expenditure. Moreover, the scale of transfer payments to localities also reached more than 10.2 trillion. It can be said that all public budget revenues of the central government are transferred to localities. The central government, through transfer payments, not only grasps the economic lifeline of local governments, but also achieves the average wealth between regions. Next, let's talk about the second category, which has been introduced and will be introduced. The local fiscal balance policy is worth paying attention to. The main focus is on three policies. The first is the replacement and strong control of local debts. In the past decade, there have been many problems in the management of local debts, especially the high cost of implicit debts. This high-interest expenditure is no longer sustainable. Therefore, starting from 2023, the replacement of existing debts has begun in batches, mainly based on special financing bonds. In 2023, about 1.4 trillion yuan has been issued, and it is expected that the issuance will continue to expand this year, with a total scale reaching about 2.5 trillion yuan. In addition to financing bonds, we also need to reduce expenditures. Local debt management policies are being introduced one after another, including the approval system, budget management, total quantity management, accountability mechanism, and creditor management. These debt management mechanisms should have been introduced 10 years ago or gradually improved during the process of debt accumulation. Now that local governments are still heavily in debt, the management mechanisms are only just coming. Under the mode of both financing and reducing expenditures, the debt scale cannot expand, which will lead to the financial revenue of backward areas from the original 3 legs to only 1 leg of transfer payments. The second policy worth paying attention to is the shift of consumption tax. And the third policy worth paying attention to is the change from the city head to the village head model. The Rural Collective Economic Organization Law, which will take effect next May, attempts to transform rural areas from cost centers to revenue centers. In other words, in the future, the state will no longer allocate a large amount of funds to support rural areas. Rural collectives will be company-based and self-sufficient, reducing costs and increasing revenue. the shift of consumption tax to the village head, and the implementation of these three local fiscal balance measures are obviously not enough to completely solve the problem of local fiscal exhaustion. In the future, the real role may still need to be played from the system to change the central, local, real right structure. Next, we will discuss the core and most complex future deduction in the central-local relationship, how to adjust the central-local real rights relationship. To analyze how the Chinese central government can expand its real rights, we first need to look at the projects in which the central government's expenditure can really expand. There are basically the following categories: ORI's national defense and public security, social security, medical and welfare, education, culture, scientific research, and basic construction and strategic industry policy. Among them, the upper limit of expenditure on science, education, and culture is too low, and the basic construction has long been in surplus. Therefore, the projects that can really allow the central government to expand its rights are only three items: states' national defense, social security and welfare, and strategic industry policy. Based on these three items, it is clear to deduce three patterns of expanding real rights, and these three patterns have historical case paths for reference. The first pattern is to export war abroad, and by rapidly increasing defense expenditure, it can drive the expansion of central expenditure. Defense expenditure must correspond to the use of military power. If a large amount of funds are spent on military expenditures, but only 停留在支出 without use, it will become a heavy burden on the whole society. Historically, the economic stimulus model with military expenditure as the core is the most typical example of Germany and Japan before World War. At present, China's military expenditure is indeed climbing, and there is indeed a possibility of exporting war abroad. However, we should also objectively evaluate that China is still far from initiating a large-scale war at present. Therefore, although this pattern is possible, the probability of sudden conversion in a short time is very small. Perhaps only when the central government's financial rights also collapse will it choose to take a desperate measure. The second pattern is the demand-side reform, which is also the pattern adopted by most developed countries at present by expanding welfare and tax cuts. It increases the sense of security for ordinary people and reduces the cost of living. This is a path with a very high feasibility and has been practiced by countless countries. The recent series of stimulus policies indeed show a trend of exerting force on the demand side, but both the strength and actual results can only be described as passable. The effect is there, but it is impossible to fundamentally reverse the low consumption situation. Therefore, it is now clear that we are most likely to choose the third pattern, which is the supply-side reform. This is also the field where China's economy has been exerting force over the past decade. You can directly judge that this is the so-called path dependence. In an ideal situation of policy formulation, they hope to stimulate the economy and revive consumption by upgrading industries and enhancing the income ability of practitioners. On the path of supply-side reform, the main reliance is on government macro control, that is the visible hand. It replaces the original imported high-value added products with domestic products. And as the industry continues to grow, it can also seize market share externally. In 2023, China's high-tech product categories have an import scale of about 5 trillion, accounting for 27% of the total import. The gross profit margin of these high-tech products in the original producing countries is generally as high as 40 to 50%. So if these profit margins are transferred to the country, it can be calculated that it can increase domestic labor income and capital profit by more than 2 trillion. If we look at the numbers alone, supply-side reform can indeed stimulate the economy and revitalize consumption. Its advantage is that it can directly see the effect of industrial upgrading rather than driving through demand. this feeling is more condensed, such as China's electric vehicles. If they can sell well in the world like Japanese and Korean cars, the money earned back in the automotive industry are tangible and can be seen. However, the key problem with this pattern is that industrial policy itself is similar to venture capital investment and has uncertainty. The success of past industrial upgrading does not mean that it will definitely succeed in the future. The success of the electric vehicle industry does not mean that China's rocket recycling technology can also succeed. Supply-side reform is actually a double-edged sword. In addition to the government-led great miracles to succeed, it must truly establish a unified Chinese market. Under the premise of limited demand-side stimulation, the overall social demand cannot explode in the short term. And it is impossible to have a situation of overheated consumption after the epidemic in the United States. Although Chinese companies are trying their best to go overseas, external demand is very unreliable. Whether it is the TikTok investigation incident or the anti-dumping of electric vehicles, it proves that Western countries have an inherent hostility to the rise of China. Therefore, the only solution is to return to the country and adjust the internal demand structure. Improve the efficiency of the market structure and market efficiency, and increase the added value of new capacity. Clearing out inferior capacity, selecting excellent enterprises, and lifting population mobility restrictions, allowing labor elements to flow to more efficient regions and industries, and bringing enough domestic market demand to emerging industry. All of the above is actually a reform in the economic field. The entire reform path is roughly as follows. The household registration policy will be fully opened in the future, except for the core areas of a few first-tier cities, such as the special existence of the eastern and western cities of Beijing. The Rural Organizational Economy Law will also ensure that the restrictions on population mobility between urban and rural areas will gradually exit history. Of course, corresponding to this, the dualization of the resident security system will basically continue the status quo, and at most, limited welfare improvements will be introduced for vulnerable groups. Secondly, the transfer payment model will gradually change from indirect transfer to direct transfer. However, due to local financial management issues, a lot of money may be intercepted or embezzled in the process of flowing to people's livelihoods and social welfare. In the future, the net population may become the core indicator of transfer payments, bypassing the inefficient black hole of local finance. This will lead to the shrinkage of the institutional industry chain in many backward areas. In simple terms, in the past, being admitted to the civil service in small places, such as county towns, and eating public food almost meant a lifetime of clothing and food security, because their income is unrelated to the local economic development level, but relies on the writing of the developed coastal provinces thousands of miles away. When the population continues to flow out of these areas, they will continue to be depressed and even bankrupt. The vast underdeveloped areas of China will inevitably follow the Heganization process. In this cycle, as resources are transferred to more efficient areas, backward areas will be abandoned. The overall social efficiency will be improved and the domestic market will regain vitality. Of course, this is an ideal state of evolution and is still in the promotion stage. China's economy will face a K-shaped development for a considerable period in the future, at least before the population crisis is completely relieved. In the developed areas and core cities of China, such as the 6 provinces in the southeast plus 50 cities, the future economic volume may rise to more than 70%. Here, China's high, middle, and low-end industries will be fully gathered, and the economy will maintain a relatively good growth rate, forming a modern version of the Southeast mutual protection. However, in the other part of the K-shape, which is the downward part, except for special resource-type cities, most other areas will face long-term infrastructure sequelae and industrial institutionalization and other historical legacy issues. The most serious problem is that these issues will not be resolved. Hundreds of millions of people living in these areas will either leave their hometowns to seek new ways of life or be forced to accept the fate of living in the Rust Belt.